The night I planned to confess to my husband that I was worth over $1 billion, I discovered he was plotting to steal it all with another woman. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city down in the comments. And if this story already stopped you in your tracks, the same way it stunned everyone at that dinner table, hit that subscribe button and smash that like. Now, let's rewind. Let me take you back to how this incredible moment all began. My name is Vivian Hale, and I am 34 years old. Before I take you into the story of how my world shattered and how I rebuilt it piece by piece, you need to understand who I am and where I come from. I was born into privilege, but not the ordinary kind. My father, Richard Hale, was a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms, on Wall Street, in places where empires are built and destroyed with a single decision. He was not just successful, he was formidable. Newspapers adored calling him self-made. To them, he was a man who rose from nothing, fought through the unforgiving trenches of business, and carved an empire out of steel, technology, and real estate. But what the world never truly grasped was the scale of what he had built. They saw the skyscrapers, the companies, the patents, the luxury. They saw the lifestyle, but they didn't see the full picture, because my father made sure they couldn't. He guarded his wealth with a kind of vigilance that bordered on obsession, and that same vigilance he poured into guarding me. His only child, his only daughter. I grew up in a house where I was loved, but also protected, as though the world was filled with wolves, waiting just outside the gates. "Vivian," he would tell me, his voice low and steady, "money attracts. But what it attracts isn't always love." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. To me, he was just my father, the giant who carried me on his shoulders, who told me bedtime stories about building instead of castles in the sky, who believed that I could be anything, but only if I learned to see people for what they really were, not what they showed me. When I was 27, that giant left my world. I can still remember the day like it happened yesterday, the phone call, the silence that followed, the hollow echo of my heels as I walked through the halls of the Hale estate, realizing for the first time that they no longer belonged to him. The house, though filled with priceless art and antiques, felt unbearably empty. Grief came in waves, relentless and suffocating. But grief wasn't the only thing he left me. He left me something so staggering, so overwhelming, that it didn't feel real even when the numbers were spoken aloud in Edward Langston's mahogany-paneled office. My father's attorney, a man who had been by his side for decades, read through the documents with the calm precision of someone who understood what $1 billion meant, but also knew better than to be awed by it. 1 billion, he said. The words so casual they might as well have been describing a weather report. All consolidated under the Hale estate to be transferred into trusts under your name, Vivian. Even now, years later, I can still feel the way my breath caught in my throat. $1 billion. The number itself almost didn't matter. It was too big, too abstract. It wasn't something you touched. It was something you lived inside of, a fortress built out of zeros and signatures. People imagine that kind of wealth as freedom. They imagine luxury cars, private jets, champagne flowing endlessly, and yes, all of that exists if you want it. But what they don't understand is that money, especially that much money, doesn't just free you, it chains you. It paints a target on your back that never fades. I should have been proud of my father's genius, proud of the empire he left me, proud to be the heir to something most people could never even dream of. Instead, what I felt was fear. Fear of what would happen if people found out. Fear of being reduced to a number, a headline, a net worth, rather than a woman. Fear of never being seen for who I was, only for what I carried in accounts and investments and silent trusts. That fear settled deep in me. So heavy it shaped every choice I made after his passing. I decided that the world would never know, not my friends, not the men I dated, not even the people I thought I could trust. If they wanted to be in my life, they had to want me, Vivian, not Richard Hale's fortune. So I built a life of disguise, one that looked comfortable, wealthy even, but never extravagant. I dressed in clothes that whispered elegance instead of screaming it. I lived in homes that were spacious but not ostentatious. I told people my father had been well off and that I had been fortunate, but I never revealed just how much fortunate meant. And for a while, it worked. People saw me as independent, successful, privileged, but approachable. What they didn't see was the billion-dollar shadow that followed me into every room. But secrets have a way of seeping into your bones. At first, I thought I was just being smart, being cautious. Over time, I realized I was also being lonely. Because every conversation, every friendship, every relationship carried with it a question I could never answer honestly. Who am I really if they don't know the truth? I carried that question like a stone in my chest. Some days it was light, almost unnoticeable. Other days it was crushing, especially in love. Love, more than anything, terrified me. Because if wealth could change the way people smiled at you in passing, what would it do to the man who held your heart? Would he hold you tighter? Or would he see you as nothing more than a vault waiting to be unlocked? That fear silenced me again and again, even when there were moments I wanted to tell the truth. I had seen the hungry eyes of people in college when they discovered my last name. I had seen how quickly interest could turn from friendship to calculation, and I promised myself I would never let that happen in love. Then came Nathan Drake. I met Nathan at a small art exhibit in Boston, the kind of place where the wine is served in delicate glasses, and the paintings are meant to spark conversation more than awe. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make silence feel like music. Nathan wasn't awkward. He didn't stumble through pauses or fidget with his hands. Instead, he listened, really listened. He asked questions that made me feel seen, laughed at himself in a way that disarmed me, and looked at me with eyes that felt curious instead of calculating. I remember telling myself in that moment, this is different. This is real. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, someone could love me without ever knowing the empire I carried in silence. That night, when Nathan smiled at me across the gallery, I didn't see a wolf waiting outside my father's gates. I saw a man who might just be my safe harbor. I didn't know then that harbors can sometimes hide storms. Nathan swept into my life with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. At first, it was little things. The way he texted me good morning before I was even awake, the way he made plans instead of waiting for me to. He had a confidence that bordered on daring, but it was softened by humor, by a boyish charm that made me laugh when I least expected it. We slipped into each other's lives quickly, almost too quickly, but I told myself that was what love was supposed to feel like catching a train that had been waiting for you all along. Our conversation stretched late into the night, weaving through books, art, travel, and the small, intimate details of our childhoods. He wanted to know everything about me, my favorite films, the music I played when I couldn't sleep, the foods I craved when I was sad. When he asked about my family, I gave him the edited version of the truth. My father had been successful, I said. I had been fortunate. I described the Hale estate as comfortable, careful to let the word carry warmth instead of grandeur. He didn't pry, and I let myself breathe easier every time he accepted my simple answers without suspicion. Our first kiss happened on a rainy evening in Boston, just outside a little cafe tucked between brick buildings. The rain had dampened his hair, and when he leaned down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A spark that wasn't tangled up with fear. By the time months passed, we were inseparable. He charmed my friends, fit easily into my routines, and seemed to love me without conditions. That was the part that both thrilled and terrified me, Because if he loved me now, without knowing the truth, what would happen when he did? Still, I let myself fall, and when he asked me to marry him, standing in the middle of Boston Common under twinkling lights, I said yes with tears in my eyes. Our wedding was small by design. I insisted on it. Friends, a few close relatives, nothing flashy. I wore a gown of simple silk, elegant without screaming wealth, and Nathan looked at me like he had won the world. Everyone said we looked radiant, that we were glowing, and maybe we were. But even as I smiled for photographs and danced to the music, part of me knew I was dancing inside a cage of my own making. Our first home together was spacious, yes, but not ostentatious. A townhouse in Cambridge with enough room for both of us, cozy enough to feel intimate. Nathan worked long hours in marketing, and he carried himself with the pride of a man providing for his wife. He liked that role, the breadwinner, the protector, and I let him have it. Because behind the scenes, I maintained my secret life. Accounts tucked safely under my maiden name, properties and trusts, investments quietly managed by Edward Langston, my father's old attorney. To Nathan, we were living comfortably on his salary with a bit of cushion from the modest trust I had inherited. To me, we were balancing two worlds, the illusion of normalcy and the reality of a billion-dollar empire hidden in the shadows. At first, it felt manageable, but the longer our marriage stretched on, the heavier it became. Every time Nathan beamed with pride over paying for a vacation, I smiled and kissed him, while my chest ached with guilt. Every time he teased me about being spoiled, not knowing the real weight of what I carried, I laughed and changed the subject. Every time he mentioned our future, I wondered how long I could keep lying to him, because love, true love, demands honesty. And though I loved Nathan more than I wanted to admit, I was not honest. I told myself I was protecting us, but deep down I knew it was fear. Fear of the flicker I might see in his eyes the moment he learned the truth. Fear of the way love could so easily transform into calculation. Still, as the years passed, a quiet voice inside me began to whisper louder and louder. It's time. He deserves to know. You deserve to be free. And one winter evening, as snow tapped gently against the windows of our townhouse, I decided the time had come. That evening, the snow tapped gently against the windows of our townhouse, each flake catching the glow of the street lamps outside. I sat in the study with a glass of wine, staring at the fire as it flickered and popped. My heart raced with a decision I had been putting off for nearly 7 years. It's time, I told myself. No more lies, no more hiding. I rehearsed it in my head, how I would begin softly, how I would explain the truth about my father, about the inheritance, about the billion-dollar secret that had sat like a stone in my chest all these years. I imagined Nathan's surprise, maybe even hurt. But then I pictured him holding me close, telling me nothing could change how he felt. That was the hope I clung to, that love would eclipse everything. By the time I climbed the staircase toward our bedroom, my pulse was quickening. My hands trembled as I smoothed my hair, willing my voice not to shake. Nathan was home earlier than I expected, humming to himself in the kitchen. I told myself this was fate, that tonight was the night I would finally set down the burden I had carried for so long. But then I froze, because as I reached the landing, I heard him laugh, a soft chuckle, followed by words spoken in a tone so gentle, so unfamiliar. It stopped me cold. Nathan was on the phone. At first, I thought nothing of it. He often spoke with colleagues late in the evening, but the way he spoke now, it wasn't business. His voice was tender, syrupy, touched with intimacy. I frowned, pressing my palm against the wall as I edged closer to the half-closed door. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something in me already knew I had to hear. And then I heard her name. Camilla. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might be sick. The sound of her name, spoken in a voice I had thought was mine alone, carved through me like a blade. "Don't worry, baby," Nathan whispered, low and intimate. "She's clueless, completely clueless. I'm just waiting for the right moment." My breath caught, my body locked in place, frozen in disbelief, and then the words that shattered me. "Yeah, she's loaded, more than she lets on. I just need her to sign off on some of the accounts she hides under her maiden name. Once that's done, we'll take it and go. You, me, Camilla, always, you and me." The glass of wine in my hand trembled so violently I thought it would slip from my fingers and shatter on the floor. My heart pounded, each beat echoing like a hammer against my ribs. He chuckled again, as though betrayal weren't enough, as though cruelty needed to be wrapped in charm. "She thinks I'm in love with her," he murmured. "But you know the truth. You're the one I love. She's just my ticket. Ticket. Not wife, not partner, not soulmate. Ticket." The word burned into me, searing every nerve. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, fighting the urge to gasp, because if he heard me, if he knew I was there, I would have nothing but my ears as proof. The call ended eventually, leaving a silence so thick I thought I might collapse beneath it. Minutes later, Nathan strolled past me, phone tucked in his pocket, humming again as though nothing had happened. When he saw me standing there, pale and shaken, he smiled with that easy, boyish grin I had once loved so much. "Hey, Viv," he said lightly, "you okay? You look a little pale." I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. "I'm fine," I managed. My voice felt foreign in my own mouth. He kissed my cheek and moved on, oblivious to the war that had just detonated inside me. That night, I lay beside him in bed, his arm draped over me like a man with nothing to hide. I stared at the ceiling, my body still, my mind screaming. Hours passed, his breathing steady, while mine fought to stay quiet. He didn't know. He had no idea that I had been moments away from telling him the truth, that he was married not to a modestly comfortable woman, but to a billionaire heiress. He had no idea that his betrayal had detonated seconds before I stepped into the light, and as I turned my face to the wall, away from him, one truth crystallized in me with perfect clarity. Nathan Drake thought I was clueless, but I was not broken. He had revealed himself, and I, Vivian Hale, carried not just my father's fortune, but his cunning, his resilience, his fire. Nathan thought he was plotting, but he had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. The night I almost told my husband that I was worth $1 billion was the same night I learned he had never really loved me. He called me his ticket. His plan wasn't just to cheat, it was to take everything. When the call ended, I stood frozen in the hallway of our townhouse, the walls closing in around me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I had been seconds away from giving Nathan my truth, handing him my entire world, and instead I had stumbled onto his, and his truth was poison. But here's the thing. I didn't break. Not that night. Not ever. I slipped back into the bedroom, slid under the sheets, and let him wrap his arm around me like nothing had happened. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and steady. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body rigid. He didn't know. He thought I was clueless. But I wasn't. And from that moment forward, everything changed. The next morning, I moved through the house like an actress on a stage. I smiled, I kissed him good morning. I poured his coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and asked about his day. He didn't notice the stillness in my eyes, didn't hear the calculation in my silence. That was the beginning of my silent pretense. Every word became measured, every gesture calculated. I was still his wife in his eyes, but inside I had already begun to separate from him. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was his observer. He believed he was the clever one. that he could lie in my bed, eat at my table, and whisper to another woman behind my back while I remained oblivious. But he underestimated me, because I am Richard Hale's daughter. And Richard Hale didn't just leave me money. He left me his cunning, his resilience, his fire. Within days, I reached out to the only man I could trust, Edward Langston, my father's attorney. I sat across from him in his oak-paneled office, the same one I had first stepped into as a trembling 27-year-old, inheriting a fortune I barely understood. This time, I was different. I wasn't trembling. I was sharpening. "Edward," I said, my voice steady, "my husband is plotting against me. He doesn't know what I overheard, but he suspects my wealth runs deeper than what I've told him. I need to make sure he can't touch it. Not a penny." Edward's face didn't change. That was one of the things I admired most about him, his composure. But his eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered with understanding. "Then we move quickly," he said. "We restructure, we transfer, we reinforce. He must never know where the money really sits." And so we did. Accounts that had joint visibility became private again under the Hale Trust. Properties Nathan believed were co-owned slid quietly back into my sole possession. Investments were shielded behind layers of corporate veils and holding companies. By the time we were finished, the empire Nathan dreamed of siphoning was already beyond his reach. But I couldn't just protect myself. I had to prove, because suspicion wasn't enough. Betrayal whispered through a phone line wasn't enough. I needed evidence. Evidence that would not just confront him, but destroy him. So I played the part of the loving wife. I kissed his cheek when he came home. I listened to him talk about work, about his golf weekends, about his little frustrations. I laughed when he cracked a joke. I leaned on his shoulder during movies. And all the while, I watched. Some nights, when he thought I was asleep, Nathan would slip into the study and close the door. He thought his voice was hushed enough, his laughter muffled enough. But I heard everything. That's when I heard her for the first time. Camilla Hart. Her voice was smooth, playful, with that smug lilt of someone who believed she was winning. Their conversations were sickeningly intimate, whispers of baby and always you and me. I sat in the dark hallway, my phone recording every word, my heart hammering with both fury and resolve. Each recording became ammunition. Each careless admission is another nail in his coffin. "She's close to trusting me," Nathan bragged one night. "A little more time and I'll have her sign off on the big accounts. Then it's done. We're gone. Vault, ticket, loaded." Those were the words he used to describe me. Not my wife, not a partner, not love. And with every word, something inside me hardened. I stopped crying. I stopped trembling. I stopped being afraid. I turned every ounce of my pain into quiet resolve. My father once told me, "Vivienne, never let them see you bleed until you're ready to strike." That lesson became my mantra, so I let Nathan believe his performance was flawless. I let him think I was still devoted, still blinded by love. I smiled at dinners, clinked glasses over anniversaries, played the doting wife he thought he had deceived. But inside, I was building something far stronger than love. I was building revenge. By the time weeks had passed, I had collected hours of recordings. Phone calls, laughter, plans whispered into the dark, proof of his betrayal, his greed, his affair with Camilla. And with every clip, I felt myself transform. I was no longer the woman hiding her fortune out of fear. I was no longer the wife crushed by betrayal. I was my father's daughter. And Nathan Drake, the man who thought he had found his golden ticket, was about to learn that harbors can hide storms. I had hours of recordings by now, his voice low and syrupy, weaving lies with Camilla, her giggles, smug little sighs, the sound of someone who thought she had won a prize. I didn't just listen. I studied them. Every pause, every word, every slip that revealed how far their scheme had gone. Nathan believed I was sleepwalking through my life. In reality, I was documenting his every betrayal. And let me tell you something. The more I listened, the less I cried, because tears are wasted on men like Nathan Drake. I turned my heartbreak into steel, into strategy, into a weapon. I started small. When Nathan bragged about his job, about landing a new client, I smiled and asked polite questions. But in my head, I was cataloging every lie he told, every inconsistency. If he said he worked late, I noted the time he actually came home. If he claimed he was with colleagues, I compared it to the recordings of him whispering to Camilla. I stopped reacting emotionally and I started reacting like a hail, like my father taught me. Edward Langston and I met often under the guise of charity meetings. I'd leave the house with my planner tucked under my arm, kiss Nathan on the cheek, and head to Edward's office downtown. There, we'd sit with coffee and paperwork, moving money like chess pieces on a board. "Vivienne," Edward told me, "betrayal of this kind isn't just personal, it's tactical. He wants your fortune? Then we play his game better than he ever could." Together, we locked every door Nathan didn't even know existed. Properties he believed were shared were transferred back into my name. Accounts were shielded under shell corporations and trusts. Documents were updated, airtight, so even if Nathan tried to snoop, he'd find nothing. And all the while, he still smiled at me across the breakfast table, completely blind to the war I was waging under his own roof. Some nights, when I listened back to the recordings, I'd catch myself gripping my wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Don't worry, baby," Nathan whispered in one of the calls, his tone dripping with devotion. "She's close. She trusts me. Soon she'll give me access, and then it's all ours." Ours. Not mine. Not his. Theirs. I hit pause on the recording and sat in the dark, my pulse steady, my breathing controlled. That word, ours, no longer gutted me. It fueled me. Because I knew what he didn't. There was no ours. There never would be. Weeks turned into months, and I perfected my role. I became an actress, flawless in my performance. At dinner parties, I laughed at his jokes. In public, I leaned into his touch. On anniversaries, I toasted to many more years with a smile that made even our closest friends sigh. But when I was alone, I was ruthless. Every new piece of evidence went into a folder. Recordings, screenshots, notes, dates. Proof that my husband was not a husband at all, but a thief with a wedding band. I stopped thinking of it as marriage. I started thinking of it as a case. And Nathan was the defendant. The turning point came one night when I overheard him tell Camilla, "She thinks I'm in love with her, but she's just my vault. You're the one I love. Always you." Vault. Not wife. Not woman. Not Vivienne. Vault. That was the night I stopped being the betrayed woman. That was the night I became the hunter. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, my face calm, my eyes cold. And for the first time since my father's death, I felt Richard Hale's fire in my veins. My father had been betrayed once in business, nearly losing millions. He taught me the lesson I now lived by. Never let them see you bleed until you're ready to strike. And I was getting ready. Outwardly, Nathan thought we were closer than ever. I made him his favorite meals. I teased him like I used to. I played along with every word. Inwardly, I was preparing the moment of his exposure. I didn't want whispers. I didn't want private confrontations where he could twist the truth or beg for forgiveness. No, I wanted the lights on. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the man who thought he had outsmarted me to be stripped bare in front of the very people whose respect he craved most. And Camilla? She wouldn't escape the spotlight either. By now, Nathan was so blinded by arrogance he didn't even notice the shift in me. He thought he was orchestrating everything, when in reality I had already taken the wheel. He thought he was weeks away from stealing my fortune. What he didn't know was that I was weeks away from ending him. That's how betrayal works. It blinds the betrayer. They think they're clever, untouchable, that their target is too naive to see the truth. But here's the thing Nathan Drake never understood. I am not naive, I am not weak, and I am not a ticket. I am Vivian Hale, heir to a billion-dollar empire, daughter of Richard Hale. And Nathan had just given me the perfect reason to stop hiding and start fighting. If this story has you hooked right now, stop scrolling and hit that subscribe button. Don't just lurk. We're dropping more twists you won't see coming, and you do not want to miss what happens next. And hey, if for some wild reason you think this story isn't worth a subscribe, then do us a favor. Drop it in the comments and tell us why. Go on, we dare you. Every betrayal has its turning point. The moment when the victim stops being the prey and becomes the hunter. For me, that moment had already passed. By the time weeks had gone by, Nathan Drake no longer looked like my husband to me. He looked like a case study in greed. He smiled at me across the breakfast table, oblivious to the fact that every word he spoke, every glance at his phone, every late-night whisper was ammunition I was collecting. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his shadow. And shadows see everything. Recording after recording piled up on my phone. His voice silky and smug. Camilla's laughter light and confident. As though she believed she had already replaced me. Soon, Nathan whispered one night. She trusts me. Just a few more weeks, Camilla, and then we'll be gone. We'll have everything. Everything. The arrogance dripped from every syllable. What he didn't realize was that every call he made, every whisper he thought was private, was another brick in the wall I was building around him. A wall he wouldn't escape. But collecting evidence wasn't enough. I knew Nathan. He was clever, slippery, a man who could charm anyone in a room. If I confronted him privately, he'd twist it. He'd cry. He'd beg. He'd try to convince me I'd misunderstood. No. This needed to be bigger, louder, public. I didn't just want Nathan to know I had discovered his betrayal. I wanted everyone to know. His colleagues, my family, our friends. The people whose respect he craved. The people he thought would admire his success. I wanted him stripped bare in the very room where he thought he'd be celebrated. The idea came to me one evening as I sat in my father's old library at the Hale estate. I hadn't been there in months, but the house still smelled like wood and old books, the kind of scent that carries memory. My father's portrait hung above the fireplace, his gaze stern but proud. I stared at it for a long time before whispering, I think I know how to end this. Because what better stage for Nathan's downfall than the estate my father built, the place that carried the weight of our family's history? And what better occasion than Nathan's birthday dinner? He would walk into that house believing he was about to inherit my world. He would leave it stripped of everything. I called Edward Langston the next morning. His birthday, I said simply. That's when we end this. Edward nodded, calm as always, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the recognition of just how brutal this would be. Then we prepare, he replied. We sat for hours mapping out the steps. Legal documents, divorce papers, the recordings cataloged and backed up on multiple drives, financial protections finalized. Everything needed to be airtight, not just emotionally, but legally. Vivian, Edward said quietly, this will be public. Once it happens, there's no going back. Are you ready for that? I looked him straight in the eye. I've never been more ready. From that moment, the plan became my obsession. During the day, I played the perfect wife. I kissed Nathan on the cheek, asked about his day, even teased him when he bragged about his big ideas. At night, I sat in my study, headphones on, replaying the recordings, cataloging them into folders marked by date and time. The more I listened, the more confident I became. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, conspiracy. A man who had married me, not for love, but for access. And I had everything I needed to prove it. Invitations were sent under the guise of celebration, family, friends, a few of Nathan's colleagues, even some of my father's old associates, men and women who had known me since I was a child. Nathan's eyes lit up when I suggested hosting the dinner at the Hale estate. "Finally," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Finally, you're opening your world to me." I smiled faintly, careful to let the expression linger just long enough to convince him. He had no idea that the world I was opening wasn't one he'd inherit. It was one that would bury him. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, Nathan was radiant. He walked taller, smiled wider, as though he believed his victory was inevitable. He thought the estate meant trust. He thought the invitations meant progress. He thought I was preparing to hand him the keys to the kingdom. And I let him believe every single lie he told himself. But when I was alone, the mask slipped. There were nights when I sat in the estate's library, staring at my father's portrait, whispering the words I couldn't say out loud. "I'll protect it, Dad. I'll protect everything you built." I thought about the girl I had been at 27, trembling in Edward's office, overwhelmed by the scale of her inheritance, terrified of what the world would do if it found out. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced betrayal head-on and decided she would not be broken. The night before Nathan's birthday, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully beside me. His breathing was steady, his arm draped over me like always. I studied his face in the dim light, the face I had once loved so fiercely, the face I had imagined growing old beside. Now all I saw was a mask that was about to be ripped away, and as I lay there, calm and still, I realized something with crystal clarity. Tomorrow the storm would break, and Nathan Drake would never see it coming. The Hale estate had always been a place of history, of power. The chandeliers had seen decades of celebrations. The walls lined with portraits of the men and women who had built our family name. But tonight, it was dressed for something else entirely. Tonight, it was the stage for a reckoning. Nathan's birthday, his grand illusion. Guests arrived in tailored suits and glittering gowns, their laughter spilling into the halls as they admired the house, the grounds, the legacy. Staff moved gracefully between them with trays of champagne, the air buzzing with warmth and celebration. I moved among them with a hostess's composure, my smile effortless, my tone gracious. No one could see the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Nathan, however, was radiant. He soaked in every compliment, every handshake, every toast. In his mind, this night was proof that he had finally crossed into my real world, that he was being welcomed into the inner circle of the Hale Empire. He leaned down once, whispering into my ear, "This is perfect, Viv. Just perfect. Finally, people will see us as we really are." I smiled faintly, tilting my head just enough to hide the sharpness in my eyes. "Oh, they'll see Nathan, just not the way you think." Dinner was served in the grand hall. The long table glittered with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, candlelight flickering across the faces of friends, colleagues, family. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his posture smug, his confidence swelling with every passing moment. He raised his glass, his voice booming with charm. "To another year," he toasted, "and to the incredible woman by my side who makes all of this possible." The room erupted in applause. I lifted my glass, my expression serene. Inside, I burned, because every word, every gesture, every touch of his hand against mine was a lie. And soon, everyone would know it. Across the table, Edward Langston sat quietly, his presence almost unnoticeable to those who didn't know him. But to me, he was an anchor. The documents were ready. The evidence was secure. Everything we needed was in place. Nathan glanced at him once, mistaking Edward for a mere guest, perhaps even a sign of trust. He had no idea that Edward was the knife I had been sharpening for months. Course after course was served. Roasted meats, delicate vegetables, fine wines. Laughter filled the room, conversations flowing easily. From the outside, it looked like any other grand dinner at the Hale estate. But to me, every clink of a glass, every burst of laughter was a drumbeat, counting down to the moment the mask would come off. I studied Nathan as he basked in the glow of the evening. The way he looked at me with that smug little smile, convinced he was moments away from unlocking everything I had hidden. The way he leaned into his colleagues, bragging about his plans for the future, vague enough to sound ambitious, pointed enough to impress. He thought this night was his coronation. He had no idea it was his execution. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was poured, I stood slowly. The silk of my gown whispered against the marble floor, the hem brushing delicately as I rose. Conversations quieted, heads turning, eyes settling on me. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice calm, steady. Carrying through the hall with quiet authority, Nathan beamed, his hand slipping onto mine as though to steady me, his eyes glittering with anticipation. He thought this was it. He thought I was about to hand him my empire. The room waited, breathless, unaware of the storm about to break, and I looked around at them all. My family, my friends, his colleagues, my father's old associates, witnesses, every single one of them. I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of it. Because in a matter of moments, Nathan Drake's world would crumble. If this had you on the edge of your seat, don't just sit there, smash that subscribe button right now. We've got more twists, more betrayals, and more jaw-dropping stories coming your way. And listen, if you're watching this and still not subscribing, then tell us why in the comments. Seriously, if you can watch a $1 billion betrayal unfold and not hit that button, we want to hear your excuse. The room stilled as I stood, the silk of my gown whispering across the marble. Dozens of eyes fixed on me, the faint glow of candlelight flickering against crystal glasses, waiting for me to speak. Nathan's hand rested lightly on mine, his smile wide, confident, indulgent. He thought this was it, that I was about to open the gates of the Hale Empire and hand him the keys before witnesses. I let the silence stretch. It was heavy, deliberate. My father once told me that silence is power. It unsettles, it draws focus, it forces people to lean in, and lean in they did. I drew a slow breath, my pulse steady, my voice calm when I finally spoke. Tonight, we celebrate Nathan Drake, my husband, the man who, for years, has stood beside me as my partner, my companion, my supposed safe harbor. A ripple of warmth spread across the table, the kind of polite murmurs guests give when a speech begins. Nathan's smug grin widened. He squeezed my hand beneath the table. I lifted my eyes, scanning the faces around me, family, friends, my father's old associates, Nathan's colleagues, witnesses, the people he respected most, the people who would never look at him the same again. And because we are surrounded by those who matter most, I continued, I believe it's only right to share the truth. Nathan shifted slightly, excitement sparking in his gaze. He thought he knew what was coming. Poor fool. I withdrew my hand from his and straightened. The truth about what it means to love, the truth about what it means to trust, and the truth about what it means to betray. The murmurs changed. Confusion, unease. Forks clinked against plates as guests glanced at one another. Nathan's smile faltered just slightly, a flicker so quick most wouldn't notice, but I did. "Viv," he murmured under his breath, his voice low, warning, "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. My eyes swept across the table, resting momentarily on Edward Langston at the far end. He gave me the faintest nod. Everything was ready. I turned back to the guests. My voice grew sharper, stronger, carrying to every corner of the hall. For 7 years, I believed I was building a life with a man who loved me for me, a man who respected my past, my choices, my secrets, a man who cherished the woman, not the fortune. The room was dead silent now, save for the crackle of the fireplace. What I didn't know, I said slowly, was that my husband was not my partner at all. He was my enemy. A collective gasp swept through the table. Heads swiveled toward Nathan, whose face was now taut with unease. "That's absurd," Nathan cut in, laughing lightly, too quickly. "Viv, sweetheart, you're making a scene." I tilted my head, studying him the way a surgeon studies a patient before the first cut. "Am I?" He reached for my arm, but I stepped away, my voice rising. "For months I have listened. For months I have recorded. For months I have watched as Nathan Drake plotted behind my back, not only to betray me with another woman," gasps, murmurs, a sharp intake of breath from my aunt at the far end, "but to steal from me, to siphon the fortune my father built, to strip me of everything my family created." The room erupted in whispers, chairs shifting, eyes widening. Nathan shot to his feet, his voice booming. "This is insane! She's lying!" He laughed again, hollow this time. She's had too much wine. That's all." I reached into the small velvet clutch at my side and withdrew my phone, calmly, deliberately. "Would you like to hear it for yourselves?" Nathan's face drained of color. I tapped the screen and the recording filled the hall, his voice smooth, confident, venom wrapped in silk. "Don't worry, baby, she's clueless. I just need her to sign off on some of the accounts under her maiden name. Once that's done, we'll take it and go. You, me, Camila. Always you and me." The room froze. The only sound was his own voice echoing back at him from the phone, damning him in front of everyone. And then, the laughter. Camilla's soft, smug giggle followed by his murmured, "She thinks I'm in love with her, but she's just my ticket." Gasps broke out like shattering glass. Someone cursed under their breath. My cousin covered her mouth in shock. Nathan lunged toward me, his face twisted, panic breaking through his polished facade. "Turn that off!" But Edward was faster. He rose from his seat, tall and commanding, intercepting Nathan with a calm hand raised. "Sit down, Mr. Drake." Nathan froze, rage flashing in his eyes. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Edward's gaze was ice. "The man who ensured you'll never touch a penny of what you tried to steal." The guests whispered louder, the weight of truth spreading across the room. I held the phone steady, my voice unwavering. For months, Nathan thought he was clever. Thought he could lie in my bed, whisper to another woman, and scheme to strip me of everything my father left me. Nathan whirled, desperate now, his voice cracking with false charm. "Vivian, please listen to me." "No." My voice cut through him like steel. "You don't speak now. You had months. You chose betrayal, and tonight, you answer for it." Camila's name rippled through the room like a curse, murmured on shocked lips. A few guests exchanged looks, already recalling seeing Nathan with her at past events. Puzzle pieces slid into place. The empire of lies he built was crumbling right before him. I stepped closer, my eyes burning into his. "You called me your vault, your ticket. Not wife, not love, ticket. And now, Nathan, your ticket has been revoked." He tried to laugh, but the sound was strangled, broken. His mask was slipping faster than he could patch it. "You think anyone will believe this?" he barked, gesturing wildly at the table. It's fake. She edited that." The guests' eyes told the truth. They already believed. They believed because betrayal carries a stench you can't disguise perfect. I'll continue right from where we stopped, keeping the same tone and flow. I turned to Edward, who held a slim leather folder in his hand, pristine and ready. "Not only do they believe," I said, my gaze locked on Nathan, "but the law will too." Edward slid the folder across the table, its weight landing with a dull thud. Nathan flinched as though it were a weapon, and in many ways, it was. "These," Edward announced calmly, "are the finalized divorce papers, along with documented evidence of attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit financial theft, and marital infidelity. Copies have already been secured with both our firm and the district attorney's office." The guests erupted again. Whispers, gasps, heads turning from me to Nathan as though watching a play reach its climax. Nathan's face went crimson, his composure shattered. He slammed his palms on the table, leaning forward, spittle flying as he hissed, "You think you can humiliate me like this? In front of everyone?" I didn't flinch. "Humiliate you?" I echoed, my tone cold. "No, Nathan, I'm simply showing you for who you really are. You did the rest yourself." I pressed play on another recording. His voice filled the room once more. "She's close to trusting me. A little more time, Camilla, and I'll have her sign off on the big accounts. Then it's done. We're gone." Camilla's sultry laugh followed, venom laced with smugness. A ripple went through the guests again. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others muttered, unable to hide their outrage. Nathan lunged for the phone, but Edward intercepted him, one firm hand against his chest. Nathan stumbled backward, his bravado cracking under the weight of so many eyes, so much judgment. "Vivienne," he stammered, his voice breaking for the first time. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble, every sound like a gavel striking judgment. "I understand that I gave you my trust, my love, my loyalty, and in return, you gave me betrayal, deceit, and greed." I paused, letting the silence slice through him. "I understand that you saw me not as a wife, not as a woman, but as a vault, a prize, a means to an end. And I understand that you thought you could outsmart me." The room was still. All eyes were on us. "But you forgot one thing," I whispered, leaning close enough that only he could hear the last words. "I am Richard Hale's daughter, and I never play to lose." His eyes widened, a flicker of fear breaking through the rage. I straightened, turning back to the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to tonight's celebration, but I felt it necessary for the truth to be known. Nathan Drake is no partner, no husband, no ally. He is a fraud, and tonight his performance ends." A murmur of agreement spread through the guests, some nodding, others glaring at Nathan with open disdain. "Get out," I said simply, my voice low but carrying across the hall. Nathan's jaw clenched, his fists tightened at his sides. He looked around desperately, as though searching for someone to defend him, someone to deny what they'd heard. But there was no one. Not even his colleagues met his gaze. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice raw, cracking with fury. "You think you've won, Vivienne. You haven't seen the last of me." "Perhaps," I replied coolly, "but you've certainly seen the last of this life. Of me, of us." Two of the estate's security staff stepped forward, men who had worked for my family for years. They positioned themselves on either side of him, firm but respectful. Nathan's face twisted in rage. He tried to shove past, but they blocked him easily. His anger spiraled into shouting, his voice echoing off the grand walls as he cursed, raged, threatened. But to me, it all sounded distant. I stood tall, calm, unshaken, watching the man who had once been my husband dragged from the hall like a disgraced actor whose final act had ended in ruin. When the doors closed behind him, silence fell again. I drew a breath, my shoulders straight, my voice steady as I addressed the room one final time. "This house has stood for generations," I said. "It has seen victories, losses, triumphs, betrayals. But one thing it has never seen, and will never tolerate, is deceit hidden beneath its roof." I raised my glass, steady in my hand, to truth, to resilience, and to never underestimating a Hale. There was a pause, and then, slowly, firmly, The guests raised their glasses too. Crystal clinked. Voices murmured in unison. To truth, to resilience. The toast rang out, sealing the night not as Nathan's triumph, but as his downfall. And as I drank, I felt the fire of my father's legacy burning in my veins. Nathan thought he had written the story of my downfall, but in truth, he had only given me the opening lines of my revenge. The crystal clink still hung in the air when I lowered my glass. My lips barely touched the wine, but I held the pose long enough to let the image burn itself into their memories. Vivian Hale, unshaken, triumphant, mistress of her house even after shattering her marriage in front of half the city's elite. Around me, the guests settled back into their chairs with the kind of uneasy grace that follows catastrophe. Some dabbed at their mouths with linen napkins as though the ritual of manners could erase what they had just witnessed. Others whispered in tight knots, their voices low but urgent, trading theories, judgments, scraps of gossip that would by morning become headlines in whispered circles. The music had stopped long ago. The quartet in the corner sat frozen, bows suspended above strings, waiting for a signal they would never receive. The air itself felt swollen, thick with disbelief and scandal. I placed my glass down with deliberate care, the ring of crystal against wood slicing through the murmurs. "Dinner is served," I announced smoothly, as though nothing had happened. My tone brooked no argument. "Please eat." It was almost cruel, I knew, asking them to return to their lamb shanks and saffron rice after watching me gut my husband alive with nothing but words and evidence. But cruelty was a tool, and I had learned, long ago, that the sharpest blades are often sheathed in civility. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a fork scraped against porcelain. A chair creaked. A glass was lifted, and like a machine grinding reluctantly back to life, the dinner resumed. Except nothing was the same. I watched them from my seat, my face serene, every muscle under my control. They stole glances at me, quick and darting, like children testing the boundaries of a fire. Some looked with awe, others with discomfort, and a few with fear. None of them would forget tonight. To my right, Aunt Eleanor leaned closer, her jeweled hand brushing mine. "Vivian, darling," she whispered, her perfume thick with roses and age. "That was dramatic." I turned my head, meeting her sharp, bird-like eyes. The truth often is. She gave a small nod, lips pursing in a line that said she would not argue but would certainly repeat every word to her bridge club come Monday. Across the table, I caught my cousin Clara staring at me wide-eyed, her fork untouched, her plate cooling before her. She looked at me as though I were both monster and miracle. I offered her the faintest smile. She blushed and dropped her gaze. Edward remained standing near the side of the room, the ever-watchful shadow, his folder still in hand. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a subtle nod of approval. No theatrics, no praise, just acknowledgement. Exactly what I needed. The meal continued in stilted motions. The laughter was gone, replaced by careful conversation, words chosen with surgical precision. Every guest here would leave tonight with a story, but it would be my story, told on my terms. I let them eat, let them whisper. Let the weight of what they had seen settle into their bones. And all the while I sat at the head of the table, calm and untouchable, as though I hadn't just burned my marriage to ash before their eyes. Minutes stretched, courses changed, steaming plates of fish, roasted vegetables, delicate pastries for dessert. I tasted little, my appetite secondary to control. When the final plates were cleared and coffee was poured into porcelain cups rimmed with gold, I rose once more. The scrape of my chair against the marble drew every gaze instantly. The air tightened again. "Tonight," I began, my voice steady, smooth, "was not the evening any of you expected. I do not apologize for that. Truth rarely arrives politely, but I do thank you for witnessing what needed to be revealed." A few nods, a few murmurs of agreement. My father built this house, I continued, sweeping my gaze across the hall. He built this name, and I will not see either tarnished by deceit. What you saw tonight was not weakness, it was strength. The strength to confront betrayal, to end it, and to ensure that the Hale legacy remains uncorrupted. I paused, letting the words settle like embers into dry wood. You will leave here tonight with many thoughts, perhaps even doubts. But remember this, the Hale family does not fall. We endure, we adapt, and we prevail. The words left my mouth like a vow, echoing in the vaulted ceilings, reverberating in their minds. When I lowered myself back into my chair, the silence that followed was not confusion this time, but respect. Uneasy, reluctant perhaps, but respect nonetheless. I reached for my coffee, lifting the delicate cup, and sipped as though the night had been nothing more than another gathering, as though Nathan Drake had never existed at all. And in that moment, I felt the shift. The empire he tried to steal had just swallowed him whole, and I, Vivian Hale, sat at its head, alone, unbroken, and untouchable. If you thought that dinner was brutal, you haven't seen anything yet. Smash that subscribe button right now because the next chapter is where secrets get dirtier, betrayals cut deeper, and revenge gets personal. And hey, if you're bold enough to sit here watching Vivian roast her husband alive without subscribing, drop your excuse in the comments. We're waiting. The silence after Nathan's collapse was deafening. His birthday dinner had transformed from a polished spectacle into a battlefield. And the Hale estate walls that had once absorbed decades of whispered negotiations and private triumphs, now bore witness to a war of betrayal laid bare. But here's the truth. No one in that room yet understood. Dragging Nathan out was only Act 1 of his downfall. The bigger game, the real storm, had just begun. Because Camilla was still out there, and she was not the type to go quietly. I knew it even before the echoes of his humiliation had faded from the marble halls. That woman, the voice that had dripped like poison into my husband's ear for months, wasn't going to let her golden plan unravel without a fight. And she had one weapon Nathan never truly possessed: patience. Nathan was reckless, arrogant, the type of man who thought he could outwit a Hale by smiling wide and lying bigger. Camilla, on the other hand, was deliberate, calculating, the spider, not the fly, and I knew she would not forgive me for turning her golden ticket into ash. So while guests whispered behind champagne glasses and Nathan's name began to rot in the mouths of his colleagues, I sharpened my focus. This wasn't over. This wasn't victory. This was survival, and survival required anticipation. Edward Langston's words from earlier that week echoed in my mind. Betrayal of this kind isn't just personal. It's tactical. They want your fortune, then you play the game better than they ever could. The dinner was the first strike. Now I needed to control the battlefield. The morning after Nathan's public unmasking, headlines screamed his disgrace. My carefully curated leaks had done their job. Reporters who had once admired his marketing genius now tore him apart as a fraud, a cheat, a man living off a woman he'd tried to rob. I didn't shy away from the press. That would have been weakness. Instead, I crafted a statement so precise, it cut like a scalpel. I will not speak to the details of what transpired in my marriage, but I will say this. My father taught me that loyalty is the only true currency. When that loyalty is betrayed, everything else collapses. This is not a story of money, it is a story of trust, broken beyond repair. Short, sharp, human. It was exactly the kind of statement the world devours. Enough vulnerability to make me sympathetic, enough steel to remind them I was still Richard Hale's daughter. The response was immediate. News anchors replayed my words on loop. Social media lit up with hashtags: Hale Strong, Ticket to Nowhere, $1 billion betrayal. Strangers defended me with the kind of passion reserved for heroines in a tragedy they believed they were part of. And Nathan? He became the punchline, memes of his smug smile, clips of his protests outside the estate gates, paparazzi shots of him disheveled, clutching his phone like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. I should have felt satisfaction, but what I felt instead was the steady hum of vigilance, because Camilla hadn't surfaced. Not yet. And silence from a woman like her? That was never safety. That was strategy. Days turned into weeks, and I rebuilt my routine with careful precision. Each morning, I met Edward at the office to tighten the walls around my empire. Each afternoon, I played the role of a woman moving forward. Charity luncheons, estate meetings, appearances that whispered strength. And each night, when the estate grew quiet, I replayed the recordings, studied every call, every word, every slip Nathan and Camilla had made. One thing was clear. Camilla had been more than just a mistress. She had been an architect. She wasn't content with Nathan siphoning funds. She wanted the whole empire gutted and rebuilt in their names. She had studied me, studied the Hale trusts, studied the patterns. She wasn't after love. She was after legacy. And now that Nathan had been stripped bare, I knew exactly what she would do. She would come for me herself. The first attempt came quietly. A letter slipped under the estate gates one morning. Expensive stationery, perfume faint but deliberate. No signature, just one line scrawled in ink, so dark it bled into the paper. You may have destroyed him, but you haven't destroyed me. We're not finished, Vivienne. I held the letter between gloved fingers, my chest tightening with both rage and anticipation. There it was. The silence had broken. Edward's face hardened when I showed it to him later that afternoon. She's testing you, he said, looking for fear. She won't find it, I replied. But inside, I felt the old weight pressing down, the familiar fear that money painted a target on my back, that wolves were always waiting at the gate. I had a choice. Hide behind the estate walls and wait for her strike, or pull her into the light myself. I chose the latter. I orchestrated a series of appearances, deliberately calculated to look like vulnerabilities. A charity gala with limited security, a solo lunch at a downtown hotel, even a quiet evening stroll through Boston Common, the very place Nathan had proposed years before. Every move was bait. And I knew Camilla was watching. It didn't take long. At the gala, I felt her presence before I saw her. The prickle on the back of my neck, the subtle hush that followed me into the room. When I turned, there she was, Camilla Hart, in a gown of blood-red silk, her smile a blade hidden behind glossed lips. She didn't approach me directly. Of course not. She circled. She whispered to donors, laughed with executives, let her eyes linger on me just long enough to send a message. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was just another weapon. What struck me most wasn't her face or her figure. It was the calculation in her gaze. She looked at me the way a hunter studies prey, the way Nathan never could. And that's when I understood. Nathan had been her pawn as much as he had been mine. The realization only sharpened my resolve. Camilla Hart wasn't going to fade into the background. She was going to fight for what she believed she deserved. And I was going to make sure she lost more than she ever imagined. The first words we exchanged came not at the gala, but weeks later, when she cornered me at the Hale estate gates. I had just returned from a board meeting when I saw her leaning against the iron bars, sunglasses hiding her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips. "You play well," she said as I stepped out of the car. "I'll give you that." I paused, my keys tight in my hand. If you came here for Nathan, he's not inside. He's not part of this world anymore. Her laugh was low, musical, the kind of sound that unsettled more than it charmed. "Oh, darling, I didn't come for Nathan. He was never the prize." I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the iron bars, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think this is over because you embarrassed him, but you've made a mistake. You've painted a target bigger than you know, and unlike Nathan, I don't trip over my own arrogance." I held her gaze, my expression carved from stone. "You don't scare me." "Good," she said softly, "because scared women bore me." Then she slipped her sunglasses back on, turned, and walked away as though she owned the very ground she stepped on. I stood there long after she was gone, the weight of her words pressing against me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about war. And war, my father had always taught me, is won not by strength alone, but by strategy. So I began building mine. I began to prepare the way my father would have, not with brute force, but with strategy. Camilla wanted to test me? I would bait her. She wanted to circle me like a predator? I would force her into the open. Edward and I spent hours in his oak-paneled office, the air thick with cigar smoke and determination. We restructured the trusts again, layering them in protections that would take an army of lawyers years to unravel. We cut off every potential path she might try to exploit: shell companies, holding corporations, properties tucked under generational names. But defense was not enough. I wanted her exposed, so I orchestrated invitations. Not to her, of course, but to the circles she coveted. Invitations to luncheons, to boardrooms, to galleries where the right whispers carried weight. And I made sure her name was excluded. Every event became a wall she could not scale. Every room she tried to enter was one where her absence was noted. I starved her of access. And the more I starved her, the bolder she became. The next strike was not a letter. It was a leak. An anonymous tip to a financial blog hinting at irregularities in the Hale estate accounts. A whisper of hidden debts, of fragile empires. It was clever. Subtle enough to raise eyebrows, dangerous enough to plant seeds of doubt. But she underestimated me. By the time the story broke, Edward and I had already prepared the counter. Public records of our solvency, statements from auditors, carefully placed reassurances from allies. Within 24 hours, the rumor had flipped, painting me not as vulnerable, but as unshakable. Camilla had fired her first true shot, and she had missed. But in her miss, she revealed herself. She was no longer the shadow in Nathan's phone. She was the hand trying to strike me directly, and that was exactly what I had been waiting for. Because you cannot fight shadows, but you can destroy a hand once it reaches too far. And Camilla Hart had just reached. I tightened the walls, sharpened my resolve, and prepared for the inevitable. Because one truth had crystallized in me with perfect clarity. Nathan thought he was the storm, but he was only the rain before it. Camilla was the real tempest, and I, Vivian Hale, had no intention of being swept away. If this had you on the edge of your seat, don't just sit there. Smash that subscribe button right now. We've got more betrayal, more battles, and twists you will not see coming. And hey, if you're watching all of this unfold and still haven't subscribed, then tell me why in the comments. Seriously, if you can watch $1 billion empire go to war and not hit that button, I want to hear your excuse. The storm did not arrive all at once. It never does. It began as murmurs, as shifting glances in drawing rooms and hushed conversations in corridors where my name was spoken with equal parts awe and suspicion. In Boston's upper echelons, silence is never neutral. It is loaded, heavy, a currency of its own, and I could feel it being traded around me. Camilla had failed with her first strike, but she had also proven her willingness to play openly now. The facade of Mistress in the Shadows was gone. She was moving into the light, and light is dangerous when it falls on a woman like her. I had grown up watching my father navigate this world. Richard Hale never underestimated a whisper. Whispers, he would say, were like termites, silent, invisible, but capable of collapsing the grandest structures if left unchecked. And whispers had begun to circle me again, Subtle questions about my stability, about my heart, about whether the betrayed heiress was still in control of the empire her father had left behind. I would not give them room to grow, so I answered the whispers with precision. Every morning, I staged strength. Meetings where I sat at the head of the table, decisions that tightened my grip on the Hale fortune. Every afternoon I appeared in public with composure polished to glass, and every evening, behind the fortress of my estate, I studied Camilla's moves the way a general studies maps before battle. It was Edward who first noticed the shift. She's building her own network, he told me, sliding a dossier across the mahogany table one late evening. Inside, photos, names, threads connecting donors, investors, politicians. She's not just circling, she's recruiting. Recruiting. The word made my skin tighten. Camilla was not content to simply claw at me with scandal. She was trying to weave her own empire out of the scraps Nathan had left behind. She thinks she can challenge me, I said, scanning the documents. Edward's eyes narrowed. She thinks she can replace you. Replace me. The audacity of it was laughable, but laughter was not the correct response. Ruthlessness was. The first time Camilla confronted me directly, it was in public, at a gallery opening on Newbury Street. I had chosen the event deliberately, knowing she would come, knowing she could not resist the kind of stage where the city's eyes and ears gathered in one space. And she did not disappoint. She arrived in emerald silk, her arm linked through that of a hedge fund manager, with more money than taste. The whispers started the moment she entered, rippling outward like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned, conversations stuttered, and then she was in front of me. "Vivian," she said, her voice warm enough to scald, "how radiant you look." I smiled, the kind of smile that cut instead of soothed. "Camilla, I see you found another patron." Her eyes flickered, only slightly before she tilted her head. Men do so love to support ambition, don't they? It was a performance, both of us aware of our audience. We spoke with velvet voices, but the crowd felt the steel beneath. Two women circling, testing, measuring. "You're wasting your time," I said softly enough for only her to hear. "You'll never sit in my chair." Her lips curved. "Darling, I don't need your chair. I'll build my own, bigger." And then she leaned in, her breath grazing my ear. "And when I do, everyone who's whispering about you now will wish they had crossed the street to stand by me instead." I did not flinch. I would never give her that satisfaction. But inside, something flared. Not fear, but the heat of recognition. Camilla Hart was not bluffing. She truly believed she could take everything I had, not through Nathan, not through scandal, but through sheer will. She stepped back, offered me a smile sweet enough to rot teeth, and glided away. The crowd parted for her, murmurs following like an entourage. That night, as I watched her disappear into the dark, I made myself a promise. If Camilla wanted a throne, she would find herself standing in a field of ashes before she ever touched one. The escalation came swiftly after. Anonymous op-eds began to appear in society papers, thinly veiled critiques of dynastic wealth, questions about whether legacies like mine were outdated, whether women who inherited billions truly understood the modern world. No names were attached, but the cadence, the venom, reeked of her. A week later, a dinner invitation arrived from a long-standing Hale ally. When I attended, expecting the usual chorus of support, I found Camilla seated at the table instead. She laughed, she charmed, she spun stories of new opportunities and fresh perspectives. She was weaving herself into the fabric of my world, thread by thread, until even allies who owed everything to my father began to glance at me with uncertainty. Edward warned me not to underestimate her reach. "She's playing long," he said. "She's planting seeds. By the time they sprout, people won't even remember she wasn't always part of this circle. But seeds can be poisoned." I began my counter quietly. not with loud accusations, not with public battles. That would have fed her narrative. No, I struck in silence. Behind closed doors, I tightened alliances. I whispered truths into the right ears, truths about Camilla's past, about the trail of men she had drained before Nathan. I didn't need to invent anything. Reality was damning enough, and I reminded them who I was. Not just Richard Hale's daughter, not just the betrayed wife. I was Vivian Hale, and my blood ran with the kind of steel that built empires. Still, Camilla persisted. The second direct confrontation came not in a ballroom or a dinner table, but on my own ground. It was midnight when the estate alarm sounded, a low chime indicating the gates had been breached. Security caught her at the edge of the gardens, not sneaking but strolling, as if she belonged there. When I demanded to see her, she smiled as though it were all a game. "Do you really believe walls can keep me out?" she asked, her voice soft against the night. I stared at her across the expanse of manicured lawn, the moonlight catching the edges of her face, beautiful and merciless. "You've made a mistake coming here." Her smile deepened. "Or maybe I've made a point." She let the silence stretch, then leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping low enough that only I could hear. "Every time you think you've beaten me, remember this, Vivian. I am not Nathan. I don't crumble when the spotlight burns hot. I thrive in it." Then, as calmly as she had entered, she turned and walked back toward the gates, the guards trailing her at a distance. She had wanted me to see her, to feel her inside my space. It worked, but not in the way she intended. I did not feel fear. I felt fury. From that night on, I resolved that this would not be a battle of attrition. Camilla wanted to play the long game, to erode me slowly, to chip at my foundations. But I had no intention of letting her choose the terrain, so I began to plan my own offensive. It started with information. I had recordings of her with Nathan, of course, but those were already used. I needed more. I hired investigators, not the kind who wore badges, but the kind who knew how to slip through cracks, how to uncover what was buried deepest. And what they found was illuminating. Camilla Hart was not born into wealth. She was born into hunger, a childhood of scarcity, of ambition hardened into survival. Every man she had touched since was a rung on a ladder she refused to stop climbing. Nathan had not been her first, only her latest, and there were debts, not financial but personal, women she had undercut, families she had fractured. Bridges burned so thoroughly that the ashes still smoldered. This was her weakness, not scandal. She wore scandal like perfume, but the trail of enemies she had left behind. So I gathered them, quietly, discreetly. Piece by piece, I built a dossier of those who wanted to see her fall as much as I did. And when the time came, I would unleash it not like a whisper, but like an avalanche. But for all my strategy, there were moments, brief, fleeting, when I felt the weight pressing down. Alone in the vastness of my estate, the silence felt heavier than it should. In the mirror, I sometimes caught glimpses of my mother's eyes, staring back, weary and sharp, as if asking whether this was truly the life she had wanted for me. Yet each time doubt crept in, I remembered the look on Camilla's face at the gates, the certainty in her voice, and doubt turned to steel. I would not be replaced. I would not be erased. If Camilla Hart wanted war, she had chosen the wrong opponent, because I was not my husband's pawn. I was Richard Hale's heir, and I had been born for battles like this. The first real strike of my counter-offensive came weeks later, at a private investment summit. Camilla was there, of course, parading in gold and silk, her laughter carrying across the room. She was making inroads, shaking hands, promising futures. And then the dossier began to circulate. Quietly, discreetly, slipped into the hands of those who mattered most. Photographs, testimonials, letters, proof of the trail she had left behind. I watched from across the room as the shift happened. Smiles faltered, glances sharpened. Conversations ended abruptly when she approached, and for the first time since she had stepped into the light, I saw it, the crack in her mask, just a flicker, but enough. Camilla Hart was not invincible. She was mortal. She could bleed, and I intended to make her bleed again and again until she understood one truth she had spent her life denying. There is only one queen in this empire, and her name is Vivienne Hale. Power never shifts in silence. It moves with the weight of footsteps, with the drop of voices, with the sudden chill in a room when allies turn away. After the summit, I felt it, that subtle but unmistakable shift. Camilla Hart, once circling like a predator, certain of her advantage, was wobbling. My dossier had done its work. The cracks in her mask had widened, and the eyes that once followed her with intrigue now lingered with suspicion. But cracks don't shatter on their own. They need pressure. They need persistence. And persistence was what I had perfected. Edward sat across from me in his office, papers spread like weapons across the table. "She's weakened," he said, "but not defeated. Don't mistake the two." "I know." My gaze stayed fixed on the city's skyline beyond the glass. Camilla is the kind of woman who fights hardest when cornered. If I've learned anything, it's that survival sharpens ambition into something dangerous. Edward leaned back, studying me with that calm gravity that had once steadied my father. "Then you need to hit her before she regroups." I turned to him slowly, and I intend to. The weeks that followed were not filled with grand gestures or public spectacles. They were filled with patience, the kind of patience that drives enemies mad. I denied Camilla visibility. I shut her out of rooms she had just begun to enter. Where once she had glided into circles with ease, she now found doors closed, faces cool, conversations ending the moment she approached. I didn't need to shout her downfall. I let silence do the work, and it did. Word reached me through my network of confidants. She was unraveling. The hedge fund manager who had paraded her at the gallery was suddenly distant. The donors she had charmed were canceling lunches. Even Nathan, in his pitiful exile, was no longer answering her calls. But Camilla was nothing if not resilient. She pivoted as I knew she would. If Boston's elite began to close against her, she turned to New York. If one door locked, she kicked at another. I admired it in a way. The hunger. The refusal to accept defeat. It was the same hunger I had seen in my father in his youth. The same fire that had burned in me when Nathan's betrayal first came to light. But hunger without discipline is dangerous. It consumes more than it builds. And Camilla Hart was beginning to consume herself. The second confrontation came unexpectedly, not at a gala or boardroom, but on neutral ground, an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. I had traveled there for a quiet meeting with an investor. The table had barely been set when she appeared, sliding into the seat across from me as though it were hers. "Vivienne," she purred, lifting the menu as if we were two old friends sharing dinner. "You've made quite the hobby out of haunting me." My lips curved. "Or perhaps you're haunted because you can't escape me." Her eyes sparkled with something sharp. "You've been clever, I'll give you that. The dossier was well played, but don't mistake temporary setbacks for defeat. I've survived worse storms than you." I let her words hang in the air, my silence heavier than any rebuttal. Finally, I leaned forward. "You're not fighting me, Camilla. You're fighting a legacy. You're fighting the Hale name, and legacies don't crumble because a woman in red silk wants them to." Her smile deepened, though her fingers tightened around her glass. "Legacies end, Vivienne. Families rot. Names are forgotten. Empires burn. And do you know why?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Because women like me make it happen." We sat there, eye to eye, predator to predator, while the quiet murmur of the restaurant carried on around us. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a simple conversation, but we knew better. It was a declaration of war, sharpened into sentences too polished to sound dangerous, yet deadly all the same. When she finally rose, smoothing her dress, she left me with one last whisper. "Enjoy your empire while you still can. I don't plan to leave you with ashes. I plan to leave you with nothing." Then she was gone, her perfume lingering like smoke after fire. I finished my drink alone, the ice melting slowly into water, my reflection fractured in the glass. If she thought threats could shake me, she had underestimated me again. Threats don't weaken steel, they temper it. I returned to Boston with a sharper edge than before. The war was no longer about whispers and reputation. It was about endurance, about who could outlast the other, who could bleed the other dry without collapsing themselves. Edward noticed the shift in me. "You're harder," he said one evening, watching me sign a stack of contracts with practiced speed. "I have to be. Your father always said a Hale's greatest danger wasn't from enemies outside, it was from forgetting who we are inside." His words stayed with me long after I left his office, because he was right. In my pursuit of victory, I could not afford to become the very thing I despised, a woman consumed by vengeance, hollowed by rage. So I balanced the fire with precision. Publicly, I remained poised. Privately, I plotted with increasing ruthlessness. Camilla's enemies had begun to surface willingly now, sensing weakness in her, drawn to me as a safer harbor. I welcomed them, cataloged their stories, added their weight to my arsenal. The dossier was no longer a file. It was becoming a weapon large enough to bury her completely. But Camilla, as ever, was resourceful. She struck back not through the press, not through whispers, but through proximity. It was at a masquerade of all places, a charity event dripping with decadence and irony. Masks glittered, champagne flowed, and beneath the surface of elegance pulsed the familiar current of power and intrigue. I had chosen a mask of silver, intricate and sharp, the kind that suggested mystery rather than concealment. When I stepped into the ballroom, I felt eyes follow me, as they always did. And then I felt her, Camilla. Her mask was black, simple but striking, her gown a cascade of midnight silk. She moved through the crowd with ease, a shadow among shadows, until suddenly she was beside me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice low enough to disappear beneath the swell of music. All these people hiding behind masks, pretending not to be what they are. I didn't look at her. Some masks protect, others deceive. "And yours?" Her question was a blade wrapped in velvet. "Mine reveals." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick and charged. Then she tilted her head, her lips curving beneath the edge of her mask. "Careful, Vivienne. Masks have a way of slipping." She drifted away then, swallowed by the sea of dancers, leaving her words like a curse pressed against my skin. That night, alone in the estate once more, I stood before the mirror and removed my own mask. My reflection stared back at me, eyes hard, mouth set. Camilla believed I could be broken. She believed I could be unmasked. But she was wrong, because what she hadn't yet understood was this. I was not pretending. I was not hiding. The face I wore in public, the strength I projected, the composure I crafted, none of it was a mask. It was me. Entirely, irrevocably me. And if she wanted to strip me down to ashes, she would find steel beneath the flame. Steel does not burn. The war was no longer looming. It had arrived, and neither of us would leave it unchanged. But as I extinguished the last light in the room and let the estate fall into darkness, one truth settled deep into my bones. Camilla Hart had declared her intent to leave me with nothing, and I, Vivian Hale, would make certain she was left with less than nothing. She would be left with silence. The night Nathan was cast out of the Hale estate should have ended him. Any ordinary man would have disappeared into the shadows, his pride in ruins, his reputation shredded beyond repair. But Nathan was not ordinary. He was an obsession wrapped in skin, a creature who thrived on control, and once stripped of it, he did not collapse. He detonated. At first, he was a ghost. I heard whispers of him drifting through Boston like a vagrant spirit, sightings outside late-night bars, his voice hoarse as he screamed my name at locked gates, photographs in tabloids showing a man unraveling by the day, his suit jacket stained, his tie knotted like a noose. Eyes bright with that feral gleam of someone who had lost everything and yet still believed it could be clawed back. I did not underestimate him. I knew Nathan too well. A man like that doesn't fade into obscurity. He festers. He festers until the rot spills outward, infecting everything around him. And soon, the infection began. The first true strike came not to me, but to Camilla. For weeks after the dinner, she had maintained her performance of untouchable elegance. She walked into galleries draped in emerald and silk, her laughter light, her whispers calculated, her eyes daring anyone to mention Nathan's downfall in her presence. To most, she looked untouched, radiant even, like a woman who had survived the storm without a drop of rain on her. But Nathan was rain. He was the flood. He appeared at her penthouse at 3 a.m, pounding on the door until her neighbors called building security. Witnesses later described him as wild, shirtless under an unbuttoned jacket, his voice cracking as he shouted her name. "Camilla, you can't hide from me. You're mine. You hear me? You're mine as much as she ever was." Security escorted him away, but not before he hurled a bottle at her window, shattering glass across the street below. The photographs hit the tabloids within hours. Camilla, for all her poise, couldn't control the narrative. For the first time, her mask cracked, if only slightly. I clipped the article, folded it neatly, and placed it in a leather folder labeled Evidence. Nathan wasn't just burning himself. He was setting fire to anyone who had touched him. And I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried to set fire to me. The second strike was far more deliberate. It was a Sunday afternoon when I returned from a board meeting to find a bouquet of white roses waiting on the steps of the Hale estate. At first glance, they seemed harmless, even beautiful. But tucked inside was a single note scrawled in handwriting I knew as intimately as my own. "You humiliated me once. Do it again, and I'll make sure the world sees you for what you really are. Not a Hale, not an heiress, just a frightened girl hiding behind her father's name. There was no signature. There didn't need to be." I burned the roses. The ashes curled in the fireplace as I stood over them, calm on the outside, fire raging within. Nathan was unhinged, yes, but he was not stupid. Every move he made was designed to destabilize, to remind me that his shadow lingered no matter how many doors I locked. Edward urged me to press charges, but I refused. Not yet. The law was too slow, too clumsy for the game Nathan was playing. This wasn't about restraining orders or police reports. This was about power, and power required precision. So I let him circle. I let him rage. And I waited for him to show his hand. It came at a gala 2 weeks later. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, Boston's elite moving like jewels across the marble floor. I wore black silk that night, my armor disguised as elegance, every movement controlled, every smile measured, and then I felt it. The shift in the air, the cold prickle that warned me before my eyes even found him. Nathan. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, disheveled yet defiant, his eyes locked on mine with the kind of intensity that silenced everything else. For a moment, I thought he might stay there, watching. But Nathan never watched for long. He moved. He cut through the crowd like a knife, ignoring the startled gasps, the murmurs, the whispers that rippled in his wake. By the time he reached me, the music had faltered, conversation stilled, and every eye had turned toward us. "Vivian," he said, his voice steady but trembling beneath the weight of his fury. Dance with me." I didn't move. "You shouldn't be here." His smile was manic. Teeth clenched like a predator holding back a snarl. "I should be everywhere you are. You think you can erase me? Replace me? I made you, Vivian. I gave you love when you were nothing but a frightened little girl with too much money and no one to trust." The crowd gasped, scandal dripping like honey through the air. He leaned closer, his whisper sharp as glass. "But you forgot. I know your secrets too. All of them." Security rushed forward, hands on his shoulders, pulling him back. He struggled, eyes still locked on mine, his voice rising into a roar. "You're not Hale, you're not untouchable. You'll burn just like the rest of us." They dragged him out, his screams echoing through the ballroom until the doors slammed shut. I lifted my champagne glass, my hand steady, my smile composed. "Apologies," I told the room. "It seems some men can't handle rejection." Laughter rippled, nervous but eager to move past the scene. The music resumed. The evening continued. But I knew the war had only just begun. Camilla made her move days later. She called me directly, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He's unraveling faster than I expected. You should thank me for keeping him busy." "You expect thanks?" I asked, my tone cold. Her laugh was light, mocking. "Darling, you and I both know Nathan was never the mastermind. He was a weapon. A blunt one, yes, but effective when pointed in the right direction. The problem is, he's lost his aim. He's just swinging wildly now, and eventually he'll hit something you care about." "What do you want, Camilla?" "Simple." Her voice lowered, silk turning to steel. "Stay out of my way. You fight me, and you'll have to fight him too. But let me build what I want, and I'll make sure he never touches you again." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You think I'm afraid of either of you?" "No," she replied smoothly. "I think you're afraid of becoming irrelevant. And Nathan, well, he's going to make sure you're never forgotten. So choose Vivian. Irrelevance with me or chaos with him." The line went dead. I stood in the silence of my study, the city lights glittering beyond the windows, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Nathan and Camilla were no longer allies. They were predators circling each other, and I was the ground they both fought to claim. It wasn't a love triangle. It wasn't even betrayal anymore. It was war. Nathan escalated again. He began leaking documents, real ones this time, old trust agreements, property deeds, fragments of financial records that hinted at the vastness of the Hale empire. He twisted them with lies, claiming they proved fraud, corruption, a legacy built on theft. The media devoured it, spinning stories of an heiress hiding billions in shell companies and offshore accounts. I had been careful, always careful, but Nathan was inside once. He knew where the cracks might be, where suspicion could take root even if the evidence was thin. Edward worked tirelessly to contain it, releasing statements, producing counter-evidence, rallying allies. But I knew the truth. Perception matters more than proof. And Nathan was poisoning perception with every leak. At the same time, Camilla played her game louder. She stepped into boardrooms I once dominated, offering herself as a modern alternative to dynastic wealth. She whispered promises of innovation, of new blood, of liberation from the shadow of Richard Hale. And men listened, because men always listen when a beautiful woman tells them she'll give them more than they deserve. The city began to split, some standing with me, others circling her, and all of them watching Nathan with wary fascination, like a rabid dog they couldn't quite turn away from. The night I realized how far he had fallen, I found him waiting outside the Hale Library. It was near midnight. The estate was silent, the halls lit only by the glow of chandeliers. I stepped into the library, intending to retrieve a file Edward had requested, and there he was, sitting in my father's leather chair as though he still belonged. "Nathan," I said, my voice steel. He turned slowly, his smile stretched too wide, his eyes gleaming with something unhinged. "Vivian, home at last. You're trespassing. I'm visiting." He gestured to the shelves around him, to the portrait of my father staring down from above the fireplace. "I always loved this room, so full of power, so full of secrets." I stepped closer, unafraid. "What do you want?" His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of fury. "What do I want? I want what's mine. You think you can humiliate me, strip me of everything, and still sit here like a queen? You think you can win? I already have." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick as smoke. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and trembling. "You're not safe, Vivian. Not with me, not with her. You built your empire on a lie, and I'm going to burn it to the ground." Before I could respond, he was gone, slipping into the shadows, vanishing through a side door I hadn't even realized was unlocked. I stood in the empty library, my father's portrait looming above me, and I knew the truth. Nathan wasn't bluffing. He wasn't plotting for wealth anymore. He wasn't even plotting for Camilla. He was plotting for destruction. And destruction, once unleashed, cannot be contained. The war was no longer about inheritance or betrayal or love. It was about survival. Vivienne versus Camilla versus Nathan. 3 forces bound together by lies, betrayal, and ambition. And in the end, only one of us would remain standing. I had expected this. Humiliation never ends with the guilty party. It seeps, it spreads, it stains anyone close. Nathan's downfall was not contained to him. It was splashed across my name, my father's empire, the Hale legacy itself. But if the city thought whispers would undo me, they had forgotten who I was. I moved through each day as if nothing had changed. I hosted teas at the estate, attended board meetings, smiled for photographers at charity events. My gowns were deliberate. Sapphire for strength, ivory for purity, black for power. My jewelry whispered legacy, but never screamed excess. Every detail was curated, every gesture calculated. Because the image is not a decoration, image is armor. The press played its role too. Reporters dissected my statement after the dinner, my words about loyalty, about betrayal. They replayed them on morning shows, quoted them in glossy magazines, and debated them on late-night programs. To some, I was a heroine. To others, a schemer who had staged her husband's downfall for spectacle. Both versions served me. Both made me unforgettable. But the fallout was not mine alone. Camilla Hart, ever the opportunist, had not wasted a second. While Nathan spiraled in public, she ascended. She began hosting her own salons, intimate dinners with investors, private gatherings with politicians, cocktail hours that blurred into strategy sessions. Her pitch was simple but seductive. Why cling to the fading Hale dynasty when you can stand at the dawn of something new? I heard reports of one such dinner. She wore emerald silk, they said, and her laughter filled the room like music. She spoke of innovation, of breaking free from the chains of dynastic wealth, of building futures instead of preserving relics of the past. And people listened. Men with restless ambition, women tired of standing in shadows, dreamers who saw in her the reflection of their own hunger. "She's magnetic," one guest whispered afterward. "Dangerous, but magnetic." I didn't need to be there to know it was true. Camilla wasn't just the mistress anymore. She was building her own myth, brick by brick, smile by smile. And in a city drunk on reinvention, myths are more valuable than money. Then there was Nathan. If Camilla was the rising star, Nathan was the falling one. His face was plastered across tabloids, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, tie dangling like a noose. He shouted at reporters outside courthouses, slurred at bartenders, ranted at cameras about conspiracies. "She framed me," he roared once, sweat dripping down his temples. "Vivienne Hale, she's the liar, she's the thief. You don't know what she's hiding." Most dismissed him as a man unraveling. But madness, when shouted loudly enough, always finds an audience. His words planted seeds, even if they were twisted. And in Boston, even the suggestion of rot in the Hale Empire was enough to make some wonder if the walls were weaker than they appeared. At night, when the estate grew quiet and the city lights flickered beyond my window, I thought of my father. He had built an empire out of steel, technology, and blood, but his true genius was this. He never let whispers take root. He knew how to cut them off at the stem. How to remind the world that the Hale name was not to be questioned. Now, that task was mine. Camilla thought she could outshine me. Nathan thought he could outlast me. But I am Vivian Hale, and I did not survive betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak to let whispers undo me. No, the whispers were only the beginning. Boston pretends to be a city of history, but in truth, it is a city of appetite. Everyone here wants to consume something: money, legacy, reputation. The trick is to learn who feeds, who starves, and who poisons the food before anyone takes a bite. My father understood that. Edward understands that. And now I do too. Camilla thinks she's feeding them hope. Nathan thinks he's feeding them fear. But I know the truth. They're starving for spectacle. And I am prepared to serve it. The estate became my war room. Edward and I worked long nights, surrounded by stacks of dossiers, stock charts, and carefully folded newspaper clippings. My study smelled of leather and ink, my father's portrait watching us from the wall like a silent judge. "Camilla is clever," Edward said, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight. "She's recruiting the restless, the ones who never had a seat at Richard's table." "And Nathan?" I asked. Edward's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nathan is dangerous because he's reckless. He has no plan, no discipline. He will burn anything just to feel the warmth. If we let him spin too long, he'll scorch the ground under all of us." I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, my gown pooling like liquid shadow around me. "Then we don't let him spin. We give him rope, and we let him hang himself." Edward's smile was grim. "And Camilla?" "Camilla," I said softly, "we starve." Starvation, in this city, doesn't mean food. It means money. It means influence. It means silencing the whispers before they bloom into action. My father always said, "Power isn't about what you have. It's about what you can take away from others." So I began taking. One by one, I approached the men who thought they could fund Camilla's new empire. I didn't threaten. I didn't bribe. I offered them something sweeter: the security of the Hale name. Legacy still matters to men who collect power like they collect rare wines. None of them wanted to gamble their fortunes on a mistress with ambition when the Hale vaults were still within reach. Within weeks, 3 of Camilla's largest investors quietly pulled out of her venture. One sold his brownstone in Beacon Hill, claiming family reasons. Another diverted his funds to a Hale-backed charity. The third simply vanished to Europe, leaving Camilla fuming at empty promises. I didn't need to crush her outright. I only needed to make her foundation hollow enough that it would collapse under its own weight. But Nathan, as always, was not so simple. He became a storm without warning. Reporters caught him staggering out of a South End bar, tie undone, hair wild, his fists full of papers he waved at cameras like a mad prophet. "She's lying," he screamed, spit flying. "Vivian Hale isn't the saint you think she is. Offshore accounts, shell companies. Her father taught her how to hide everything. You worship a fraud." The anchors chuckled. The papers called him the ranting husband. But still, some seeds took root. People love a scandal, even one painted in madness. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No words, just a photograph of my study window, curtains drawn, lights glowing inside. Nathan's signature was silence, as much as fury. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and whispered to myself, "You won't win." But I knew He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to ruin. Camilla seized on Nathan's spiral. She doubled her efforts, doubling her charm. If Nathan was chaos, she was control. If Nathan screamed about conspiracies, she cooed about futures. Her crowning moment came when she hosted what the Boston Globe called the Dinner of the Decade. The guest list read like a map of ambition: politicians, financiers, journalists, influencers. She wore crimson satin cut like a blade, and her laughter filled the gilded ballroom of the Parker House. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I heard every word through those who were eager to report it back. Camilla stood at the center of the room, glass of champagne in hand, and said, "Boston deserves better than dynasties hoarding their shadows. It deserves light. It deserves a future. And I intend to build it, with all of you." The crowd erupted in applause. Photographs flooded social media, captions dripping with admiration. The Queen Boston has been waiting for. Camilla Hart is rewriting the rules. I clipped those too and tucked them into my folder, because every queen who rises forgets one truth: the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Nathan made sure of that. He crashed her second gala. It was late spring, the kind of evening where the city glowed gold against the Charles, and Camilla had chosen the Institute of Contemporary Art for her spectacle. Guests sipped cocktails among glass walls and steel beams, basking in the illusion of progress. Cameras lined the walls. And then Nathan arrived. The photographs captured him perfectly. Hair matted, jacket wrinkled, eyes wide with a madness that gleamed brighter than the lights. He stormed through the entrance, past the stammering staff, straight into the center of Camilla's stage. "You liar!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the glass. "You told me we'd build it together. You promised me everything, and now you pretend I never existed." Gasps filled the room. Camilla froze, her smile cracking. "Nathan!" she hissed, her voice low, dangerous. "Get out!" But he didn't move. He raised a fistful of papers, contracts, emails, fragments of truth twisted by his mania. "She used me. She used me to get to Vivian, to steal Hale's secrets. She's no innovator. She's a thief." The cameras flashed. The press swarmed. Camilla's mask shattered, fury flashing in her eyes as she lunged toward him, hissing words only the nearest could hear. "You pathetic little man. You were never more than a pawn." It was over in minutes. Security dragged Nathan out, his voice still rising. "You'll all see. They're both frauds. They'll both burn." But the damage was done. The next morning's headlines told the story. Camilla Hart exposed by deranged lover. Nathan Drake strikes again, this time against his mistress. Camilla tried to spin it. She claimed Nathan was unstable, that his accusations were baseless. But no one forgets the image of a furious man screaming betrayal in the middle of her coronation. Her empire cracked that night. And I didn't lift a finger. Still, Nathan's chaos was not victory. He was a weapon I couldn't control, a wildfire that threatened to consume more than just my enemies. A week later, I returned from a board meeting to find another gift at the gates of the Hale estate. Not roses this time. A dead raven, wings spread, its black feathers glistening with blood. A note pinned to its chest in the same scrawled hand. "If I can't have your crown, I'll bury it with you." I burned that too, but the smoke clung to me long after. Edward urged me to call the police again. I refused. Nathan wanted noise. And the police would give it to him. I wanted silence, and precision. I began moving faster. Every ally Camilla courted, I courted harder. Every whisper Nathan tried to plant, I drowned with my own. The Hale PR machine roared to life, sleek as a sports car on an open road. I sat for interviews. I posed for photographs. I let my voice be quoted in print. Richard Hale built his empire on truth and resilience. That is the legacy I carry forward. I will not be distracted by chaos. Every word was a dagger, aimed at both Camilla and Nathan. Still, I knew the final confrontation was inevitable. Nathan was too reckless to stay quiet. Camilla was too ambitious to back down. And me, I was too much my father's daughter to let either of them win. The city watched, hungry, waiting for the wolves to tear each other apart. And when they did, I would be ready. Because in Boston, wolves don't share crowns. They kill for them. If you stayed with me to the very end, then you sure would want to find out how my son-in-law slapped and disgraced me in front of 130 guests. What was my reaction? Well, you find out. Click the video on the screen to find out now.